Hello and welcome to a book review of Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. This book tied with Babel 17 for the Nebula Award in 1967, and after reading both books I can definitely say I understand why the judges had a very hard time picking between the two for a single winner. Flowers for Algernon is written from the perspective of Charlie Gordon through his progress reports. And the progress reports are called that because they are reports written by Charlie after agreeing to be a part of an experiment in order to make him smart, because Charlie Gordon is an individual with a severe mental impairment. It is referenced in the book that he has an initial starting IQ of below 70, and because of that he has led a very difficult life. Daniel Keyes does a very interesting thing in the book where at the beginning of the progress reports, because this is written from a perspective of someone with an IQ less than 70, very poorly written, and by poorly I mean that their words aren't spelled correctly, the formatting is not there, like there's not punctuation or hyphenation. I did have a little bit of a difficulty in the beginning of reading this book with that, not because I couldn't read it, but because as someone who has been around individuals with differential education plans, also having one myself, if you've ever been around someone who has a severe mental disability or a severe mental impairment, or someone who has an IQ of less than 70, it's too well written. The book starts out too well written for most individuals that would have that level of disability or difficulty. I know the reason why Daniel Keyes did that. It took me a while to come to that conclusion because mostly I was just very frustrated. He had to do the writing in the beginning that way because it still had to be legible to individuals that maybe don't have that experience with people with mental disability. Because it was unrealistic and because I knew it was unrealistic, it made it difficult in the beginning to get into the story because of my own personal frustration with the writing. Again, most people might have a difficulty or a frustration in the beginning of reading it because it's written in that style and because it's just so bad. But I had the exact opposite reaction because it wasn't bad enough, which I know is a me problem, and that would probably be just a me problem. But I do, once I realized that he had to write it poorly enough to indicate Charlie's impairment, but well enough so the average person could understand it, it allowed me to suspend my disbelief a little bit easier. So the progress report starts out, it's like, I've been accepted into this program, I went and did all these tests, and one of the tests that he had to go do was to solve a maze against a mouse that had this experiment already done to it, and this mouse's name is Algernon. And before Charlie undergoes the experiment, Algernon of course beats him handily because he is smarter than the average mouse. The negative for Charlie losing to the mouse is that he gets shocked, which, if you've done any kind of research or have any kind of historical background in how those with mental impairments or mental disabilities during that time period would understand, that's normal. But that is actually one of the things that I really, really appreciated about the book once I got past that initial beginning, is that I really appreciated the fact that Daniel Keyes does not shy away from the fact of how people with mental disabilities and mental impairments were treated in the 60s, in the 1960s. I did want to address the fact that if you are a modern reader and are leftist leaning, that you might have a difficulty with some of the language because they do use a lot of outdated terms. They use the no longer term of retardation quite often in this book, and that was the language of the time. So just be understanding that they're not going to use the more accepted and more humane terms of, mental disability and mental impairment. I appreciate that because he doesn't shy away from the fact that most individuals, that if they have a mental disability or mental impairment, instead of, going through a normal school system except with a differential education plan or being a part of a family, most of the time once they got to about the age of 5, they were sent away into a care home or into an asylum of some sort, and they were just shunned away from daily life. They were just sent off. It was an embarrassment for most families at the time period to have a child or a member of the family with a severe mental impairment or a severe mental disability. They were just shunted off so someone else had to deal with them. Or, as Daniel Keyes writes about, were just kept hidden away. They were taken out of school and they were just kept at home. The only view of the outside world being what they saw through their house window. If they were even allowed to be downstairs, sometimes these children would just be locked in their rooms their entire time. It's really disgusting how individuals with mental impairments and disabilities were treated during the 60s. Well, actually throughout a lot of history. I appreciate that Daniel Keyes didn't shy away of that. In fact, there's a point in the book in which Charlie Gordon goes to one of the homes for individuals with severe mental impairment. And again, Keyes doesn't shy away from the fact that forced sterilization was a thing for those with mental disabilities. It doesn't shy away from the fact of how poorly the care for some of these people were in these facilities. And I really, really appreciate that. And I think it's important for people to read this book if they don't know that the way our standard of life is now and the advocacy that has occurred over the past 30 years since the American Disabilities Act was passed is quite a stark contrast to what it used to be. One of the things that I have the most respect for in this book, and with Daniel Keyes, is the repetition through Charlie Gordon that individuals that have mental impairment and mental disabilities are people. They may not be able to view or enjoy or appreciate the world in at the same depth that someone without their limitations can, but they are still people and they still deserve to be treated with basic human dignity and respect. And so while a more modern reader may be turned away by the language used in the book, I still feel like it's very important for a modern reader to read it just to see how far we've come in the treatment of everyone. Going back to the plot, Charlie Gordon undergoes this experiment in order to make him smart, which is what he is most worried about because that was rammed home to him as a child. It works. So he starts to slowly, in his progress reports, change. And you can see the change slowly in the language and the spelling and the sentence structure, and into the point where he becomes a regular functioning member of society. To see him change from who he was before into what he becomes throughout the experiment is quite impactful, and I can see why the Nebula Where Justice had a hard time choosing between these two books, between Babel 17 and Flowers for Algernon, because Flowers for Algernon was such a good story. The science fiction aspect is the experiment that was done on Charlie Gordon. It shows the wrongdoings of society towards disabled individuals very strongly and very thoroughly in Flowers for Algernon. But Babel 17 is just an amazing space opera whirlwind where it has a person of color, female protagonist who is hyper intelligent, and then it goes on this amazing space quest and it talks about the importance of language, goes through all these interesting themes. I've never heard of anybody powering a spaceship the way that they fly the spaceships in Babel 17, or how they crew Babel 17. They're so completely different, but they are so good in their own rights that it would just be, if I was a judge for the Nebula Awards, I would have an extremely hard time picking between the two of those myself. There was a third book up for the running for the Nebula Award, and it was a Heinlein book, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, which makes me feel like I should read that one just to find out why it was left behind. I will say that if you are a sensitive person like I am, you can tell how emotional I'm getting talking about this. It is a hard read if you are someone who has dealt with individuals who have disability. I've talked about before on the channel that I am disabled. I have a couple of neurological conditions. I have POTS. I have sensory neuropathy. I also have autism. I'm autistic, and I have ADHD. So, but I also have a genius level IQ. So my differential education plan when I was growing up only dealt with the fact that I was really, really smart. It didn't deal with anything else. So growing up for me was very difficult until I got to high school. I didn't have any friends. So I just had a lot of emotional connection to this. It's a great book. It's a very sad book. I do highly recommend it if you get a chance for it. I feel like people don't talk about it very often anymore because of the fact that a lot of the language is outdated to our modern society, but I do think it's a very good snapshot into what it was like then, and it's important that we don't forget where we came from so we don't end up going back to it. But I highly recommend this book. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please pick up a copy of Flowers for Algernon if you have an opportunity to do so. I don't think you'll regret it. It's a very good book. And thank you for watching. Bye. Bye.